It was a chilly December morning when we decided it was time to get our Christmas tree, because we had been planning it for weeks, and the excitement in the house was growing. My wife, Sarah, and our 2 kids, Lily and Max, were all ready to pick the perfect tree. But what happened that day? Well, it wasn't what I expected. We drove out to the tree farm, but halfway there I saw a strange shop by the side of the road. The sign above the door read, "Old World Christmas Trees," in faded letters, and something about it caught my attention. But I don't know why, because I felt a weird pull to stop. Inside, the store was dusty and dim, and the air smelled like old wood and pine. In the corner of the room, there was a tall and vintage Christmas tree. It was beautiful, but there was something off about it. As we walked closer, an old man, the shopkeeper, appeared from behind a shelf. His eyes were sharp and seemed to see through me. "You will want that tree, won't you?" he said. His voice was low and raspy. I froze for a moment, but I had no idea why, because his words felt strange. Before I could respond, he added, "Be careful with that one. It is not like the others because it has a past." But Sarah was not noticing the tension in the air, smiled, and asked, "How much for that one?" The old man hesitated, then named a price. It was too good to pass up, because Lily and Max were already falling in love with the tree, and despite my growing unease, I agreed. As we left the shop, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, but I couldn't explain it. We had the perfect tree, but I couldn't help wondering, was it really perfect? That evening, we brought the tree into the living room. The kids were excited, and Sarah immediately began unpacking the ornaments. It was meant to be a happy time, but from the very beginning, something didn't feel right. As we hung the first ornament on the tree, I noticed the lights flickering. I thought it was just a problem with the connection, but then the flickering grew stranger, because it wasn't random. It seemed like a pattern, almost as if the lights were blinking in Morse code. I tried to ignore it and thought it was just a faulty wire. Then, Lily giggled. "Look, Dad, the ornament is moving." She pointed to a little red ball ornament that was slowly swaying back and forth. I didn't see how that was possible, but the way she said it made me feel uneasy. "It is nothing," I told her, and tried to calm the rising discomfort inside me. Suddenly, Max, our dog, started barking at the tree. He was normally calm, but tonight, he wouldn't stop. He backed away from the tree. His fur was standing on end, and his eyes were wide with fear. It felt like he was warning us, but warning us about what? Sarah brushed it off. "It is just the lights. The tree is fine." But deep down, I knew something wasn't right, because the tree didn't feel like a normal tree. It felt like it was watching us, and the whispers. I could have sworn I heard whispers coming from it, but no one else seemed to notice. Now, we finished decorating, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the tree wasn't finished with us yet. Then, I went to bed that night with a strange weight in my chest. That night I couldn't sleep. It was past midnight, and then I woke up to a soft sound, whispers coming from the living room. At first I thought it was just the wind, but as I listened I realized the sound was different, because it was more like soft voices, murmuring and calling to me. I didn't want to get out of bed, but I couldn't ignore it. And then slowly, I made my way to the living room. The tree was glowing. It wasn't a strong glow, but just enough to make the shadows dance on the walls. But the lights were off, and the tree was unplugged, so there was no way it should have been glowing. Then, I stepped closer, and that is when I saw it. A shadow moving just out of the corner of my eye. I turned quickly, but nothing was there. The tree stood perfectly quiet, and its ornaments were frozen in place. My heart pounded in my chest. Was I imagining things? Or had the shopkeeper been right? I had to know, so I reached out to touch the tree. But as my fingers brushed the needles, I felt a coldness that made my whole body freeze. Suddenly, I heard a faint whisper in my ear. "You shouldn't have chosen me." I spun around, but there was no one there. Immediately, my breathing grew heavy, and panic set in because the shadows seemed to grow darker, closing in on me and suffocating me. I had to get out of there, but my legs felt like they were made of stone. Then the whispers continued, filling my head and growing louder until it was all I could hear.
It is too late. Too late.
I rushed to turn on the lights, but as soon as I did, everything went silent. The tree was no longer glowing. The room was just normal. But deep down, I knew that it wasn't right because something had changed. And whatever it wasn't over. Days passed, and things started to get even stranger because Lily, our youngest, became more and more attached to the tree. It started small, just her sitting next to it and gazing at the ornaments. But soon it was all she wanted to do. She spent hours there, talking to the decorations like they were alive. Then one evening I heard her say, "Hello, pretty star. Do you like it here too?" I called out to her from the kitchen, "Lily, what are you doing?" She looked up and her face was blank. Just talking to them because they like to listen. I didn't know what to say because her behavior was so strange. Then I walked closer and asked, "Why are you always by the tree, sweetie?" She turned to me and her eyes were wide and serious. "It is special, Daddy. The tree is lonely, but it is not lonely when I'm with it." That made my stomach turn because I didn't know what to think. It was just a tree, right? But something about her words felt wrong because the way she said it was like the tree wasn't just a tree at all. One night, I stood by the tree as Lily slept, and I noticed something that made my heart stop. One ornament, a small glass ball, was glowing faintly. It wasn't like the others because the rest of the lights were dim, but this ornament pulsed with a strange light, as if it were alive. I reached out to touch it, but before I could, a cold gust of air swept through the room, and the light vanished. Suddenly, I froze. Was I imagining it? I had to know more, but deep down, I feared what I would find. I couldn't sleep that night, and I kept thinking about that ornament, the one that glowed because something was wrong with that tree, and I needed answers. So I decided to go back to the shop, hoping to get some clarity from the shopkeeper. The next morning, I drove back to the strange little store. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside. The old man behind the counter was watching me with those piercing eyes. "I need to know more about that tree," I said, and tried to stay calm. Then, the shopkeeper's face grew serious. "You shouldn't have taken it," he muttered, and his voice was barely above a whisper. I leaned in closer and urged him, "What happened to the tree? What's the truth?" He sighed, and his hands were trembling slightly. That tree, it was once owned by a family that disappeared many years ago. They were taken because the tree was cursed and their spirits never left it. Suddenly, I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean? What happened to them?" The old man's eyes darkened. "They were victims of their own greed. The spirit in that tree is vengeful and angry. Now, it feeds on loneliness and fear. That glowing ornament, it is the heart of the curse." Then, I stared at him with an urgent voice. "How do I stop it?" He looked away and said, "You must destroy the ornament, but only if you can. If it is too late, the tree will claim more than just your family." My head was spinning. Was it too late for us? The tree had already begun to take hold of Lily, and now it seemed like it wanted more. That night, things escalated as I was sitting in the living room when I heard a loud crash from the tree. Then, I rushed over to find that one of the ornaments had fallen and shattered. But it wasn't just any ornament. It was a family photo frame, the picture of our family on Christmas Day, and it was shattered on the floor. I knelt to pick it up, but something stopped me because the lights on the tree flickered again. And this time, they didn't just blink randomly. They formed a pattern, a warning. "Leave!" I jumped back and my heart was racing. Then Sarah came into the room and her face was pale because she had heard it too. The lights were flashing, spelling out the same message over and over. The air felt thick like it was pressing down on us. I think we are in trouble," Sarah whispered, and her voice was shaky. "This isn't normal, is it?" I shook my head. "No, it is not." Suddenly, I saw Lily standing in the doorway, staring at the tree with wide and glassy eyes. "It is mad at you, Daddy. It doesn't like you," she said, and her voice was cold and empty. I reached out to her, But before I could touch her, she backed away and her eyes were wild. "I need to be with it because it is lonely without me." Her words were like a knife in my heart. What had happened to my daughter? She wasn't the same and she was changing, pulled by something dark and evil. Then, something even worse happened. As the lights flickered again, the tree began to shake. The ornaments rattled as if they were alive, and the air grew so cold that I could see my breath. The tree, it was coming alive. We had to get out, but it felt like we were trapped. The family was no longer safe, and now we were running out of time. Now the tree had grown stronger, and it felt like the very ground beneath us was being pulled by the tree's roots. We tried to move it, but no matter how hard we pushed, it wouldn't budge. The roots had dug deep into the floor, like claws holding it in place because the tree was alive and was fighting back. I looked at Sarah. "We have to get rid of it, because it is the only way we can save Lily." But the moment we tried to pull the tree from its spot, the room seemed to darken. The air turned thick, and I could feel a cold pressure on my chest. Then, the ornaments began to move, without anyone touching them. They rattled and twisted, and their shadows were stretching across the walls like they were alive. Suddenly, a scream echoed in the room. It wasn't Lily and it wasn't Sarah. It came from the ornaments themselves, and we saw shadowy figures began to emerge from the tree, twisting and writhing as they came toward us. Their shapes were blurry, like shadows of something that never existed. Sarah grabbed my arm. "What do we do? What's happening?" I didn't know how to answer, because all I could think about was the glowing ornament, the one that had been pulsing on the tree. Maybe that was the key to stopping this. I had to destroy it because the spirit must be connected to that ornament, and if I didn't act fast, it would be too late for us. But before I could get close, a shadow figure lunged at me. I pushed it away, but it was like fighting smoke. My heart raced, and the room seemed to close in around us. We had to end this now. Then, I pushed past the shadows, and my heart was pounding in my chest because the glowing ornament was right there, at the top of the tree, and it was almost mocking me with its eerie light. I could hear Sarah shouting my name behind me, but all I could think about was destroying it. As I reached for the ornament, a sudden pain shot through my body because it felt like something was ripping me apart, like the tree's spirit was trying to drag me into the darkness. Then, I gritted my teeth and grabbed the ornament. The moment I touched it, a loud and horrible sound filled the room, a mix of screams and growls, as if the house itself was alive and angry. Shadows rose from the floor and attacked me from all sides, but I didn't stop because I had no choice. With everything I had, I smashed the glowing ornament on the floor. It shattered with a sound like thunder. The lights flickered violently, and the tree let out a screeching noise as it began to twist and writhe. Suddenly, the shadows that had attacked us began to dissolve. Their forms were vanishing into the air and leaving only darkness behind. I fell to the floor and gasped for breath. Now the room grew eerily quiet and the tree was no longer moving because it had collapsed. "We did it," Sarah whispered, but I couldn't breathe easily because I could feel something else was still watching us. We had broken the curse, but at what cost? It had been a week since we destroyed the tree, but the house didn't feel like home anymore because everything seemed quiet, and it was too quiet. We thought we had escaped, but deep down, I knew something was still wrong. Lily sat on the couch and stared at the empty space where the tree once stood. Her eyes were filled with tears. "I miss it," she whispered, and it was almost as if she were talking to herself. It was my friend, and it didn't want to hurt anyone. I tried to comfort her, but the words felt hollow. How could I explain to her that the tree wasn't a friend? It was a curse, and a thing that had nearly torn our family apart. The next Christmas was approaching, and the fear we had felt last year had faded into the background, or so we thought. The house seemed normal again, and it was almost too normal. But I knew deep down, something was still wrong. One evening, as we started setting up for the holiday, I noticed something strange in the living room. The same ornament from the tree, the one I had smashed, was back on the shelf. It sat there, quietly and glowing faintly. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but the closer I got, the more it seemed to whisper to me. "Don't listen," I whispered to myself. "It is just an ornament. It can't hurt us." But the whispers grew louder, and it was almost like a soft chant in my ear. It was as if the ornament was trying to speak, or call us. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow move. I turned quickly, but there was nothing there. The house felt colder, and the walls seemed to be closing in, and the faint glow from the ornament grew brighter, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Suddenly, a loud noise echoed through the room. A jingling sound like Christmas bells, but twisted and distorted. The lights flickered, and for a moment, I thought I saw a dark figure standing behind the ornament. The room went silent again, but the feeling of dread stayed. I tried to reach for the ornament, but before I could touch it, everything went black. And then, I heard the laughter, low, deep, and chilling, and it wasn't human. Suddenly, I realized the curse wasn't over. It had only just begun. It was Christmas Eve. I was sitting in the living room and waiting for the big day. The tree sparkled with lights, and the smell of cookies filled the air. My parents were laughing in the kitchen, but something in their voices made me stop, and then I leaned closer to hear. "Do you really think Santa is real?" my mom asked. "Oh, he is just a story. It is the presents and the magic that matter," my dad answered, and he was laughing. I couldn't believe what I heard because they were joking about Santa. My heart sank because I didn't want to believe it, but part of me started to think they might be right. No, I had to find out for myself, and then I made a promise to myself that night. I would stay up and catch Santa in the act because I wouldn't let them take away the magic of Christmas. As night fell, I crept into my room. The wind howled outside and made the windows rattle. I wasn't scared, but the house felt different, like something was watching me. I brushed it off and lay in bed, staring at the ceiling and waiting. Suddenly, I heard a creak from downstairs. It was faint, but clear. Then the Christmas lights blinked. Was it just me? Or was something strange going on? I waited in the dark and tried to listen. The dog, usually asleep in his bed, was now standing in the hallway. His ears were perked up and looked at the stairs with wide eyes. I swallowed hard. Was Santa real? Or was there something else I didn't know? Suddenly, I heard a sound coming from downstairs. Creak! The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about the noises from the night before. I had to talk to someone. So after delivering Christmas cookies to the neighbor, I noticed a man standing outside his house. He was old, with a long white beard, and looked like he hadn't smiled in years. I had seen him around, but he never talked to anyone. But today I felt like he was waiting for me. "Hi, mister," I said nervously, and held the cookies. But he didn't smile back. His eyes were cold, and he stared at me like he knew something I didn't. "You shouldn't be so curious, boy," he said in a low voice, almost a whisper. "The Santa you are waiting for isn't the one you expect." Then, I blinked in confusion. "What do you mean?" He glanced over his shoulder and then pulled something out of his pocket. It was a small and tarnished sleigh bell, old and rusted. "This may help you," he said, and pressed it into my hand. "Be careful what you seek, boy. Not all magic is good." I wanted to ask him more, but he turned and walked into his dark house without another word. But his warning hung in the air, heavy and strange. Then, I looked at the bell in my hand. It jingled softly, like a distant echo. My heart raced. What was he talking about? What was wrong with Santa? I didn't know, but I was sure of one thing. I had to find out. That night, I stayed up again and hid behind the Christmas tree. The house was too quiet and my parents were asleep, and everything seemed peaceful. But the air felt colder than usual, like winter had come inside. My eyes were heavy, but I couldn't fall asleep because I had to see Santa. Suddenly I heard it, a soft jingle of bells. But I froze because it was not the happy sound of Christmas bells, but something wrong. because the sound was faint, almost like it was far away. I gripped the sleigh bell tightly in my hand. Could it be? Then, I peeked around the tree. For a moment in the dark hallway, I saw a figure, a shadow, tall and thin. But it was not Santa. No, this thing was wrong, because it moved silently and its steps were slow but heavy, like it didn't care about the noise it made. The jingle of its bells sounded twisted like it was coming from deep underground. It wasn't joyful at all. Suddenly, the figure turned, and its eyes were glowing like red coals. I froze in fear, but I was unable to move. Was it Santa? No, it was something much darker because its shadow stretched out across the room, and a cold breeze swept through the house, making the lights flicker. Then, the figure slowly stepped closer, and its movements were unnatural, jerking like a puppet on strings. I tried to hide, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from it, because it was getting closer. Now, I could feel its cold presence, like a ghost in the room. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a voice, a soft whisper, right behind me.
Not all magic is good.
I spun around, but nothing was there. I couldn't move. But my heart was pounding so loud that I thought it would wake my parents. The figure, this thing, was still standing there, and its eyes were glowing bright, like two red-hot coals. I was frozen in fear because it wasn't Santa, and it wasn't even close. This wasn't something magical or jolly, and this was something dark. Then, it moved slowly. Its long arms were reaching out toward the family photos on the wall. As I watched, it seemed to be pulling something from them, something invisible, but I could feel it. A cold and empty feeling washed over the room. The figure was taking something, siphoning it like it was stealing happiness or memories. I needed to move because I couldn't just watch this happen. But the moment I shifted, I heard it. The creature's head snapped toward me. Its glowing eyes were locked onto mine, and I could feel its gaze cut right through me. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I knew I had to run. I darted out from behind the tree and my heart was racing, but as I turned to escape, the floor creaked loudly under my feet. The shadowy figure jerked forward, and its long fingers were stretching out as if it were reaching for me. I bolted and then I sprinted up the stairs. My legs were shaking and not daring to look behind me. I didn't stop running until I slammed my bedroom door shut. I leaned against it and gasped for air, but my body was trembling, and I couldn't stop shaking because it wasn't just a bad dream. It was real. That thing was real, and I had no idea what it wanted. The next morning, I was shaking because I couldn't forget what I had seen, what I had almost been caught by. Then, I ran downstairs and eager to tell my parents, because I couldn't let them think it was just a nightmare. But when I told them, they didn't believe me. "Come on, it is just a dream," my dad said with a chuckle and ruffling my hair. "You have got a big imagination, kiddo." "Maybe you are just scared of the dark," my mom added and tried to smile. "It is nothing. Just relax." But I couldn't relax because I knew what I saw. I tried to explain again, but they just shook their heads. "It is okay, sweetie. You are safe now. There is no need to worry," my dad said. His voice was soft but dismissive. But I didn't feel safe because the house felt wrong. As I walked through the living room, I noticed more strange things because the Christmas tree ornaments were out of place. The star on top was crooked, and some of the smaller ornaments were missing. The family dog was growling again, but there was no one around. He was staring at an empty corner, and his eyes were wide with fear. Suddenly I froze, because I felt something was wrong, but no one seemed to believe me. What was happening? I felt helpless and alone. It was like no one else could see what I was seeing, and I didn't know how to stop it. I couldn't handle it alone anymore, and I needed someone to believe me. So, I told my older brother. At first, he didn't believe me either. He laughed and called me a scaredy cat, saying I had just watched too many scary movies. But when I told him about the strange things happening in the house, the missing ornaments and the dog acting crazy, he stopped laughing. "Okay, maybe something is going on," he said, and his face was serious. "Let's stay up tonight and figure this out." That night, we both stayed awake, hiding behind the couch and watching the Christmas tree. It was so quiet. The kind of quiet that made you feel like something was waiting. Then we waited and watched, listening carefully for any strange sounds. Then we saw it. It wasn't the jolly Santa we were expecting. Instead, there was a shadow on the wall, moving slowly, like it was trying not to be seen. My brother and I exchanged a quick glance. We didn't have to say anything because we both knew what we were seeing. The next clue came when I checked the plate of cookies we had left out for Santa. I saw half of them were gone, and the glass of milk, it was empty. But there were no crumbs, just the cold air, a strange and sickly sweet smell. "Okay," my brother whispered, and his voice was shaking. "This isn't normal. We need to figure out what is going on before it gets worse." But as we turned to leave the room, something in the corner caught my eye. Scratch marks on the windowsill. Long and deep scratches. Suddenly I felt like we weren't alone anymore. The next morning, after our terrifying discovery, we couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. Then, my brother and I decided to go back to the reclusive neighbor because he had given me the tarnished sleigh bell, and I was sure it had something to do with the creature we had seen. When we arrived, the old man was sitting in his rocking chair, and he was looking even older than I remembered. The air was cold, and the wind outside howled through the trees, making the house creak. He motioned for us to sit, and we did even though my heart was racing. He didn't speak at first. He just stared at the sleigh bell in my hand, and his eyes were darkening. "Do you know what that is?" he finally asked in a quiet and eerie voice. I shook my head and my throat went dry. The bell seemed to pulse in my hand, as if it was alive. The old man sighed and looked out the window. "It is a charm, a protection," he explained slowly. "But it is not just any protection. It is a warning." He then began telling us the story of the shadowy Santa, a malevolent spirit that comes every Christmas, drawn to those who no longer believe in the joy of the season. This creature didn't bring presents, but it took happiness, memories, and warmth because it fed off the sadness of those who had forgotten what Christmas was really about. The sleigh bell was our only defense, but we had to use it wisely because it wasn't just for protection, it was for survival. As the old man spoke, the wind outside howled even louder, and the lights in his house flickered. My skin prickled with fear because I could feel that the shadowy Santa was near, and we felt like we were running out of time. That night, my brother and I made a plan because we knew the shadowy Santa would return, and this time, we couldn't be caught off guard. Armed with the tarnished sleigh bell, we set a trap in the living room. We strung Christmas lights around the tree, hoping to use their brightness to weaken the creature. Then we placed holiday decorations everywhere and tried to bring back the joy the shadowy Santa fed on. The whole night, we waited and watched the clock tick down. The house was cold, and the wind outside howled like it was angry. Suddenly, the room grew colder, and the lights flickered. For a moment, my heart skipped a beat because it was here. The shadowy Santa appeared again, and its twisted figure was moving silently through the shadows. This time, it was angrier and its eyes were burning with red fury. Suddenly, we realized we had to act fast. Then, I grabbed the sleigh bell and shook it as the jingle was barely audible in the cold silence. The figure turned toward us, and its face was hidden in shadows. My brother quickly grabbed the holiday lights and tossed them across the room to wrap the creature in a net of bright colors. Suddenly, Santa's movement slowed as the lights flickered and flashed, and then the shadowy figure let out an unnatural scream. The air grew thick, and I thought we might not make it. But then, the family dog, barking loudly, ran in and bit the shadow's leg, and the creature howled and stumbling back. We ran, but not before hearing one last scream. It echoed through the house like a death cry. The next morning, everything seemed normal because the house was calm, the wind had stopped, and the lights were bright and warm. But something was off when I looked outside because the snow had melted in strange spots, and the grass was frozen in a patch near the front door. It looked like something had been there. Something heavy. Inside, my brother and I checked the tree. The ornaments were still there, but one of them had a crack running through it. It wasn't broken, but it was as if the crack had appeared overnight. We stared at each other and confused. Had we really just survived the shadowy Santa? Or had it all been a dream? I didn't know anymore. When my parents woke up, they smiled and laughed, thinking we had had a normal night. They never mentioned the strange happenings. To them, it was just another Christmas morning. But to us, it felt different because the house felt cold again, even though the heater was on. The fear didn't go away. Was it really gone? Would the shadowy Santa return next year, or was it still out there and waiting for us to forget, just like the neighbor had warned? I didn't know, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. Not yet. Christmas morning arrived with bright and peaceful, just like any other. The house was full of the sweet smells of breakfast, bacon, eggs, and fresh cinnamon rolls. My parents were laughing and talking about presents, and everything seemed so normal. But something wasn't right, because I could feel it in the air, like the house was holding its breath. As I sat at the table, I looked down at the tarnished sleigh bell. It was sitting there, right in front of me, just like it had every night since the terrible encounter. Whenever I picked it up and shook it, I heard that soft and comforting jingle. But this time, when I gave it a gentle shake, there was nothing. No sound at all. My heart dropped into my stomach because the bell had always jingled. Always. But now it was silent. I stared at it as my fingers were trembling around the cold metal. Suddenly I recalled the words that the neighbor had spoken echoed in my mind, clearer than ever. It only silences when it's watching. Suddenly, a chill ran down my spine as I glanced around the room. The laughter of my parents felt distant, like I wasn't really there. The air in the house suddenly felt heavy, and I felt as though something was watching me, lurking in the corners and waiting. Now I felt like the silence of the bell was more terrifying than I could ever explain, because it was like a warning, like the creature was still out there, hidden and watching. The thought sent a wave of dread crashing over me. Was the shadowy Santa really gone? Or had we only delayed it? I didn't know what to believe anymore. As I placed the bell back down, I glanced toward the window. The snow outside had stopped, but I could have sworn I saw something moving between the trees, and it was just out of sight. And I knew. It wasn't over. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Please share this video with your friends and family too. Thanks.